I'm 79 years old, and for 51 years I thought I knew the man I married. I thought I knew every corner of his heart. I found out at his funeral that I only knew half of it. If you are watching this and you have ever trusted someone with your whole life, stay with me, because what I am about to tell you still takes my breath away every time I say it out loud. Before I begin, I want to ask you something. Type in the comments where in the world you are watching this from tonight. I read every single one of them, and it warms this old woman's heart more than you know to see how far these stories travel. And if you would be so kind, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel, because there are more stories like mine still to come, and I would love for you to be here when I share them. Now, let me take you back. Let me take you back to a spring morning in a district so small you would not find it on any map, to a young girl of 19 in a blue dress and a white prayer cap, standing at the edge of a hayfield, not knowing that the boy walking toward her would give her the greatest joy of her life and the greatest sorrow. My name does not matter so much for this story, so you may simply call me by the name my grandchildren use. They call me Mummy. That is what we call a grandmother in our way of speaking, in the Pennsylvania Dutch tongue that still lives in my mouth even now, all these decades later. I was born on a small farm in Lancaster County, the fourth of 9 children, to a mother who canned 400 jars of vegetables every autumn, and a father who could set a horseshoe before the sun was fully up. We did not have electricity in the house. We did not have automobiles in the drive. We had lanterns and horses, and a stillness in the evenings that I do not think the modern world understands anymore. A stillness that let you hear your own heart beating, and hear God speaking if you were quiet enough to listen. I met my husband, I will call him Eli, at a barn raising when I was 17 years old. He was 20, tall, with hands already rough from work, and a way of laughing that made the whole room feel lighter. He was not the loudest boy there. He was not the one showing off with the horses or teasing the girls at the food tables. He was the one quietly making sure the older women had chairs, and I noticed that. I noticed that a boy who thought of an old woman's aching knees before he thought of himself was a boy worth watching. We did not court the way the English do, the way you might see in your world, with dinners out and phone calls late at night. We courted slowly, carefully, under the watchful eyes of our families and our church. He would drive me home from the Sunday singings in his open buggy, the horses' hooves clicking steady against the road, and we would talk about small things, the weather, the harvest, whether his father's dairy herd was doing well. It sounds plain to you, I am sure, sitting there in your world of screens and instant messages, but there was a sweetness in that plainness that I have never found words fine enough to describe. 2 years we courted like that, slow and steady, until the day he asked me, with his hat in his hands and his eyes on the ground more than on my face, if I would be his wife. We were married in November, which is our wedding season, after the harvest was in and before the deep winter set in. 300 people came to that wedding. We were married in my parents' farmhouse, the furniture cleared out of the front rooms to make space for benches, and I wore a new dress that my mother and I had sewn together by lamplight over many evenings. It was not white. We do not wear white. Mine was a deep blue, the color of a summer evening sky just after the sun has gone down. I remember standing beside Eli as the bishop spoke the words that bound us together, and I remember thinking that I had never in my life felt so certain of anything. 51 years I was certain of that man. 51 years I laid beside him at night and rose beside him in the morning. I bore him 6 children, 5 of whom lived to grow old themselves, and I buried one small daughter before her second birthday, which is its own grief I will not dwell on tonight, though I carry her with me always. I churned butter beside him. I cared for him through 2 broken bones and 1 bad fever that nearly took him from me 30 years too early. I sat beside his bed the final 6 months of his life, when the cancer had settled into him and would not let go, and I held his hand as he breathed his last breath on a Tuesday morning in March, with the frost still on the windows and the rooster just beginning to crow. I thought I had said goodbye to the whole of him. I did not know, sitting there holding his cooling hand, that in 3 days' time I would learn there was a whole second life of his that had never once crossed my table, never once sat in my kitchen, never once been spoken of in 51 years of marriage. I did not know that grief was about to become something far more complicated than sorrow. I want to tell you all of it, from the very beginning, so you understand not just what happened, but how a woman like me, raised to trust and to submit and to believe the best of her husband, came to stand at a graveside and watch her whole world crack open like river ice in the first warm days of spring. Let me tell you first about the man I thought I married, because you cannot understand the shock of what came later without understanding the depth of what came before. Ellie was, by every measure our community used, a good man. He was faithful to church, sitting on the men's side every other Sunday for the service, his hat on his knee, his voice low and steady in the hymns. He was a deacon for a time, chosen by lot, which is how we select our leaders, by drawing from a stack of hymnals with a folded paper hidden in one of them, trusting that God's will moves the hand that draws. He served our district faithfully for 11 years before age, and his declining health moved that responsibility to a younger man. He ran a modest but respected woodworking shop, building furniture that English customers would drive hours to purchase. Solid oak tables and cherry wood hutches, each piece signed with a small carved initial on the underside of a drawer, a mark of pride he never spoke of, but that I always noticed when I dusted beneath the furniture in other people's homes. He was known throughout 3 counties for the quality of his work. Men would nod when they heard his name. Women would tell me at quiltings how their sister-in-law in another district had one of his tables. And wasn't I lucky to be married to such skilled hands? He traveled for his work. That was the plain truth of it, and it never once struck me as strange, because it was simply the shape our life had always taken. He would go to lumber auctions 2 counties over. He would deliver large pieces himself, sometimes staying overnight if the distance was too far to make the round trip safely by horse and buggy, or later, when our district permitted hiring an English driver for such longer trips, by hired van. Sometimes he would be gone 3 days, 4 days, once even a full week when a large order took him up into a district near the Ohio line, helping to fill an order that had come through a cousin's connections. I never questioned it. Why would I have questioned it? A wife does not sit and count her husband's absences like coins in a jar, suspicious of every gap. A wife trusts. That is the whole foundation of the life I was raised to live. Trust your husband. Trust your community. Trust that God sees what you cannot. Looking back now, with the terrible clarity that only comes after the truth has broken over you like a wave, I can see the shape of it differently. I can see the pattern that I was too trusting, or too busy, or too faithful to ever examine. But I want to be honest with you tonight, because that is the only way a story like this is worth telling. Even now, even knowing everything I know, I do not believe I could have seen it coming. He was too careful. He was too good at being 2 things at once, and I loved him too completely to ever imagine that love was not the whole truth of him. We raised our children on that farm. Rebecca, our oldest, who married a farmer 3 miles down the road and has given me 11 grandchildren of her own. Samuel, our first son, who took over his father's woodworking shop when his hands grew steady enough. Anna, our second daughter, who left our district for a more conservative community 2 states over. A choice that broke my heart a little, but that I came, in time, to accept as her own path with God. Little Katie, who we lost before her 2nd birthday to a fever that no doctor, English or otherwise, could break in time. David, our youngest son, who runs a produce stand now with his wife, and Miriam, our baby, who still lives close enough that she brings me eggs every Thursday morning without fail. Through all of those years, through all of those births and that one terrible death, through barn raisings and church Sundays and quiltings and canning seasons, Eli was there. Steady, present, a man of few words, but great tenderness. The kind of tenderness that showed itself in the way he would fix the porch step before I even mentioned it was loose, or the way he would leave a small carved wooden bird on my kitchen windowsill on the anniversary of the day we lost Katie, every single year, without ever once speaking of it aloud. That was Eli. That was the man the whole world believed him to be, and the man I believed him to be too. Right up until the day we buried him. His illness came on slowly, the way cancer sometimes does in an older body, disguising itself first as tiredness, then as a stubborn cough, then finally as something the local clinic could no longer explain away. We do not always seek the same medical treatments the English do, though our community does not forbid it either. And there was much prayer and much counsel among our family before Eli agreed to see specialists in the city. By then, the cancer had already spread further than any of us wanted to hear. The doctors gave him perhaps 8 months. He lived 6. Those 6 months were, in a strange way, some of the tenderest of our whole marriage. He was too weak by the end to work in his shop, so he spent his days in the front room, in the chair by the window, watching the birds at the feeder our grandchildren kept filled for him. I cooked him broths and soft foods when his appetite failed. I read to him from the Bible in the evenings, the same passages we had leaned on through every hardship of our lives together. Our children and grandchildren came in shifts, sitting with him, holding his hand, letting him tell them stories from his younger years, stories I had heard 100 times, but that still made me smile to hear him tell again, his voice growing thinner with each passing week. He died on a Tuesday morning in March, as I told you, with the frost still silvering the windows and the rooster crowing somewhere out past the barn. I was holding his hand. Our daughter Miriam was in the room too, having stayed the night to help me through what we all knew was coming. He opened his eyes one last time, looked at me with an expression I can only describe as full of something I could not name at the time. And he said my name, just my name, nothing more. And then he was gone. I want you to understand before I tell you what happened next that this was a peaceful death. This was the death of a man surrounded by love, by family, by a wife who had given him 51 years of devotion. There was nothing in that room, nothing in that final breath, that hinted at the storm that was about to break over all of our heads. If he knew, in those final moments, what secret he was carrying to his grave, he did not show it. Or perhaps he did, and I was simply too consumed by grief to read it in his face. I have turned that moment over so many times in the years since, searching for a clue I might have missed. Some flicker of guilt or confession he was too weak or too proud to voice. I have never found one. He looked, in the end, like a man at peace. That is the cruelest part of all of this, if I am honest with you. He got to leave in peace. I was the one left behind to learn the truth. The 3 days between his death and his funeral were filled with the customs of our community. Customs that have comforted grieving families for generations. And that comforted me too, even in the depth of my sorrow. In our way of life, the body is not sent away to a funeral home to be prepared by strangers. The women of the community, myself included, though Miriam and my sisters did the greater share of the physical work, washed and dressed Eli's body ourselves, in his good black suit, the same suit he had worn at our own wedding 51 years before, let out at the seams over the decades to fit the man he had grown into. We laid him in a plain wooden coffin, built by his own former apprentice, a young man Eli had trained in his shop years before, who wept as he sanded the wood smooth. For 2 days, Eli's body lay in our front room, the same room where he had spent his final months watching the birds, and the community came. They came in a steady stream, neighbors and cousins and men from 3 counties over who had bought his furniture and respected his craft, sitting quietly, offering condolences in low voices, bringing food that filled every counter and windowsill in my kitchen. It is our way to sit with the dead, to not rush past grief, but to sit inside it together as a community. And I found comfort in that, even as my heart felt like a stone in my chest. I did not know, as I greeted those visitors, as I accepted their casseroles and their quiet hugs, and their murmured words about what a good man Eli had been, that within days some of those very same words would curdle in my memory. I did not know that good man was about to become the most complicated phrase in my vocabulary. I want to pause here and remind you, if you are finding this story hard to sit with, that you are not alone in that. I have had 5 years now to sit with it, and there are still nights I lie awake and cannot find the bottom of my own confusion and anger and grief, all tangled together like a knot I cannot pick apart no matter how patient I try to be with myself. The morning of the funeral was cold and clear. The kind of March morning where the sky is so blue it almost hurts to look at, and the ground was still hard enough that the men who had dug the grave the day before, by hand as is our custom, had worked up quite a sweat despite the chill. Our funerals are simple. There is no elaborate program, no eulogy of the kind you might see in your world, with a speaker standing before a crowd reciting a life's accomplishments. There is a service, held in a home, with hymns sung slowly, and a sermon focused not on the deceased specifically, but on the nature of life and death and God's will. A reminder to the living that our time here is brief, and that we ought to live in readiness for the same journey Eli had just taken. Over 300 people came, farmers from our own district, and from districts as far as 30 miles distant. English customers who had known Eli through his furniture business, standing respectfully at the back in their modern clothes, hats in hand. Family from 4 states, arriving in hired vans the day before, and staying with relatives across the district. My children, all 5 of them, sat in the front rows with me, Rebecca on one side and Samuel on the other, their spouses and children filling the benches behind us. It was, by every measure, exactly the kind of send-off a man like Eli deserved. Dignified, community-centered, full of the quiet reverence our faith teaches us to bring to death. The service itself moved the way these services always move, slow and steady. Hymns lined out by a song leader in the old style. No instruments, just voices rising and falling together in German hymns that have been sung at every funeral I have ever attended in my whole life. I sat there, numb with grief, holding a handkerchief that was already damp. And I let the familiar rhythm of the service carry me the way it has carried every grieving person in our community for generations. I remember thinking, in the strange, fractured way your mind works during grief, that Eli would have approved of how many people came. He would have been embarrassed by the attention, but pleased, in his quiet way, to know he had been so respected. After the service concluded, the coffin was carried out to the wagon that would take it to the graveyard, a slow procession of buggies following behind, the horses' hooves the only sound on that cold, clear morning, besides the occasional cry of a hawk overhead. At the graveside, the final words were spoken, the coffin was lowered, and the men took turns filling the grave by hand with shovels, the sound of dirt striking wood the loneliest sound I have ever heard in my life, a sound I still hear sometimes in the deep of night when sleep will not come. It was after this, as the crowd began to disperse back toward the house for the funeral meal that always follows, the long tables of food set up in the barn to feed the hundreds who had come, that I first noticed her. She was standing at the edge of the graveyard, near the tree line, not moving toward the house with everyone else. A woman I did not recognize, dressed plainly but not exactly in our style of dress. Her cape dress cut slightly different, her prayer covering shaped just slightly wrong for our district. The kind of detail that only another Amish woman would notice. The kind of detail that told me immediately she was from a different community, a different settlement entirely. Beside her stood a younger woman who looked to be perhaps in her 30s, and beside that younger woman stood 2 children, a boy who looked about 10 and a girl who looked perhaps 7, both dressed in the same slightly different style. I remember thinking, in that first moment, that they must be distant relatives from another settlement, come to pay respects the way extended family sometimes does, even when they are not close enough to attend the full service inside the home. It happens. Our communities are connected by long threads of cousins and second cousins scattered across many states, and I had long since given up trying to track every branch of Eli's extended family tree. But something in the way this older woman was standing held my attention. She was not simply observing from a respectful distance. She was watching the grave itself with an expression I can only describe now as grief. Not polite condolence. Not distant respect. Grief, the real kind. The kind that sits in a person's shoulders and pulls their whole body downward. The kind I recognized because I was wearing it myself in that very moment. My daughter Miriam noticed me staring and followed my gaze. "Ma'am," she said, using the word we use for mother, "who is that?" "I don't know," I told her, and it was the truth. I did not know. Not yet. I might have let it go. I might have simply assumed, as grieving people often assume when their minds are too full to hold one more question, that this was simply a distant mourner I did not recognize, and moved on toward the house to help serve the meal that community tradition demanded I help serve, even on the day I buried my husband of 51 years. That is our way. Grief does not excuse a woman from her duties to the community, and in truth, I have always found a strange comfort in duty during the hardest moments of life. A way of putting one foot in front of the other, when my heart did not know how to do anything else. But my son Samuel, who had also noticed the small group at the edge of the graveyard, walked over to introduce himself, the way any polite man in our community would do when encountering an unfamiliar mourner at his father's funeral. I watched from a distance as he approached them, hat in hand, and I watched as the older woman said something to him, just a few words, and I watched my son's entire body go still. I have known my son Samuel for 50 years. I have watched him take his first steps, fall from his first hayloft, cry at his own wedding, hold each of his own children for the first time. I know the shape of every emotion that crosses his face. And what crossed his face in that moment, standing at the edge of his father's grave listening to a stranger speak, was not confusion. It was not polite curiosity. It was the particular stillness of a man whose entire understanding of the world has just been rearranged in the space of a single sentence. He turned back toward me, and even from that distance, even across the width of a graveyard filled with mourners still slowly making their way toward the house, I could see that something had happened. Something had broken open. He began walking back toward me, slowly at first, and then faster, his face pale beneath his black hat, and I remember my heart beginning to pound in a way that had nothing to do with grief, and everything to do with a fear I did not yet have a name for. "Ma'am," he said, when he reached me, and his voice was strange, thin, not like my son's voice at all. "Ma'am, I need you to come with me." "What is it?" I asked. "Samuel, what's wrong?" He would not tell me there, in front of the dispersing crowd, in front of my other children who were beginning to notice something was amiss. He simply took my arm, gently but firmly, the way you might guide someone who could not see where they were walking, and he led me across the frozen grass toward the small group still standing at the edge of the trees. I want to try to describe to you what it felt like, that walk across the graveyard, though I am not certain I have the words even now, even after all these years of turning it over in my mind. It felt like walking toward the edge of something, like the ground itself might not be solid beneath my feet by the time I arrived. I did not know what I was walking toward. I only knew, from the stillness in my son's face and the tightness of his grip on my arm, that whatever it was going to change something permanently. We reached the small group, and the older woman turned to face me fully for the first time. Up close, I could see she was perhaps 10 years younger than myself. Her face lined with the particular weathering that comes from a lifetime of farm work and sun, not unlike my own face, I imagine, to a stranger's eye. Her eyes were red-rimmed from crying, and there was something in her expression, a mixture of grief and fear, and a terrible kind of resolve, that I will never forget as long as I live. "You must be his wife," she said to me. Her accent carried the particular cadence of a different settlement, further north than ours, the kind of accent that told me before she said another word that she had grown up somewhere I had never been. "I am," I said. "I'm sorry. I don't believe we've met. Are you family from?" "My name is Ruth," she said, and something about the way she said it, careful, deliberate, like she had rehearsed this moment 100 times in her mind, made the words die in my throat. I was married to Eli for 32 years. I want to tell you that I understood those words immediately, that the meaning of them struck me like a physical blow, but the truth is stranger than that. For a long moment I simply did not understand. My mind, still fogged with grief, still exhausted from 3 days of receiving mourners and preparing my husband's body and singing hymns over his coffin, could not make sense of the sentence. Married to Eli for 32 years. I had been married to Eli for 51 years. The math did not work. The sentence did not fit into any shape my understanding could hold. "I think there's been some mistake," I said, and I remember my voice sounding very far away, as though someone else were speaking it. "I've been married to Eli for 51 years. I think you may have known him from—" "No," Ruth said, and her voice broke on the word, tears beginning to spill down her weathered cheeks. "No, there's no mistake. I know this is impossible to hear. I know this is the worst possible moment to tell you. But I have driven 6 hours to be here, and I could not let him go into the ground without you knowing the truth. Eli was my husband too. The younger woman standing beside her, the one I had guessed to be in her 30s, stepped forward then, and I could see now, looking at her properly for the first time, that she had Eli's eyes, the exact shape of them, the exact pale blue-gray color that I had looked into for 51 years, the color our own daughter Rebecca had inherited, the color I had seen reflected back at me every single day of my married life. This woman had my husband's eyes. "My name is Sarah," she said quietly. "Eli was my father." I do not have adequate words to describe what happened inside me in that moment. I have tried in the years since to explain it to my own children, to my sisters, to the small handful of trusted friends I eventually confided in, and I have never found language sufficient to the task. It was not simply shock, though it was certainly that. It was not simply grief, though grief was there too, a fresh and different grief layered on top of the grief I already carried. It was something closer to the ground, disappearing beneath my feet entirely, the sensation of every certainty I had ever held about my own life suddenly proving to be built on sand. I looked at this young woman's eyes, my husband's eyes staring back at me from a face I had never seen before in my life, and something in me simply knew, before any further explanation was given, before any proof was offered, that she was telling the truth. A mother recognizes certain things instinctively, and though this was not my daughter, there was something so unmistakably, so undeniably Eli in the shape of her face, that my body understood the truth before my mind was ready to accept it. I do not remember deciding to sit down. I only remember that one moment I was standing, and the next moment Samuel's arms were around me, lowering me gently onto the frozen ground. Because my legs had simply stopped holding me up, I remember the cold of the earth seeping through my good black funeral dress. I remember the sound of my own breathing, ragged and strange, and I remember, distantly, the sound of my daughter Miriam's voice, sharp with alarm, calling for someone to bring water. I do not know how long I sat there on the frozen ground beside my husband's fresh grave, learning that the man I had just buried had, for 32 of our 51 years of marriage, maintained an entire second family in a settlement 6 hours away. I do not know how long it took for the shock to loosen its grip enough for me to breathe normally again, for the world to stop tilting so violently beneath me. What I remember most clearly is the silence that fell over that corner of the graveyard, a silence broken only by my own weeping, and the quiet, steady voice of a woman named Ruth, a woman who had, I would come to understand, suffered her own version of this exact betrayal for 32 years, though from a different angle entirely. I will tell you everything that came after this moment, everything I learned in the weeks and months and years that followed, because I believe there is value in the telling, even when the telling is painful. But I want to pause here, at this moment on the frozen ground, because I think it is important for you to understand the totality of what was taken from me in that single conversation. It was not simply the knowledge of infidelity, painful as that alone would have been. It was the retroactive rewriting of my entire marriage. Every business trip Eli had ever taken, every night he had been away for the woodworking trade, every long weekend at a lumber auction 2 counties over, every single one of those absences, stretching back 32 years, had to be re-examined in the light of this new and terrible truth. My entire history with this man, the history I had believed to be the whole story of my life, was suddenly revealed to be only half the story. with an entire parallel history running alongside it that I had never once suspected. If you are still with me, if this story has not become too heavy for you to continue watching, I want to thank you, and I want to ask you again to consider subscribing to this channel and leaving a comment below telling me where you're watching from tonight. It helps this old woman more than you know to feel less alone in the telling of this, and I promise you, the fuller story. The story of how this second family came to be, how it was hidden for so long, and how, against every expectation I had for myself, I eventually found a strange kind of peace with it all, is still ahead of us. But first, let me tell you what I learned, piece by piece, in the days that followed that terrible moment at the graveside. Once I was steady enough to stand again, once Samuel and Miriam had helped me back to my feet and half carried me toward a bench near the barn where the funeral meal was being served, my family gathered around me in a tight, protective circle. The way a herd of animals will circle their wounded to shield them from further harm. My children were furious. That particular fury that comes from watching a parent suffer, mixed with their own shock at learning their father had lived a life none of them had ever glimpsed. My daughter Rebecca kept saying, over and over, "It isn't possible. It isn't possible," as though repeating the words might make them true. But Ruth and Sarah did not leave. They stood a respectful distance away, clearly understanding the pain their presence was causing, but equally clearly determined to see this through, to not simply deliver their devastating news and disappear back into the 6-hour distance from which they'd come. And in a decision that surprises me even now, looking back, I found myself asking Samuel to bring them closer. I wanted, despite everything, despite the trembling in my hands and the roaring in my ears, to hear the whole of it. I have never been a woman who could live comfortably with half a truth, even when the whole truth threatened to destroy me. We moved into the empty milking parlor of our barn, away from the hundreds of mourners still gathered for the funeral meal, away from curious eyes and overheard conversations that would spread through our community faster than any of us could control. My 5 children crowded in with me, along with 2 of my sisters who had stayed close since learning something was terribly wrong. Ruth and Sarah sat across from us on overturned buckets and a low bench, and in that cold barn, smelling of hay and livestock and the particular mustiness of old wood, Ruth told us the story of her marriage to my husband. She had met Eli, she explained, in a settlement in a different state, during one of his early business trips selling furniture. Back when he was still building his reputation as a craftsman and traveling more widely to establish connections with lumber suppliers and wholesale buyers. This would have been, by her account, roughly 19 years into my own marriage to him, a time when our children were young, when I was consumed with the daily labor of raising 5 children on a working farm, canning and sewing and teaching and nursing, a time when I trusted completely that his travels were exactly what he told me they were. Ruth was, at the time they met, a young widow in her community, her first husband having died in a farming accident 2 years prior, leaving her with a small parcel of land and no clear path forward. A vulnerability that Eli, whether by calculation or simple opportunity, stepped into. She described their courtship as slow, careful, much like my own courtship with him had been, conducted over several of his subsequent business trips to her area, until he eventually asked for her hand. Here is the detail that I still, even now, find almost impossible to comprehend, though Ruth explained it to me with what I could only describe as her own bitter clarity, having clearly wrestled with this exact confusion herself for decades. She did not know when she married Eli that he was already married to me. He had told her he was a widower, that his first wife had died some years before, leaving him with children he saw only occasionally due to a difficult relationship with his late wife's family, who had, in his telling, taken custody of the children after her death. It was, Ruth said, her voice hollow with the retelling, a complete fabrication, an entire false history constructed carefully enough to withstand years of marriage. I sat in that cold milking parlor and listened to a woman describe my own husband as a stranger, a man who had built an entire alternate life, an entire alternate biography, convincing enough to sustain a 32-year marriage and the raising of 2 children who believed, their whole lives, that their father traveled frequently for his furniture business between his home with them and various work obligations, and who had no idea, none whatsoever, that those work obligations were, in truth, an entirely separate family 6 hours south. A wife and 5 children who believed him to be simply a hard-working husband and father, devoted and true. The logistics of it, once explained, were almost mechanically simple, which was in some ways the most disturbing part of all. Our districts followed the same church calendar rhythm of services every other Sunday, which meant if Eli was clever about his scheduling, and clearly he was endlessly clever about it, he could structure his travels to overlap conveniently with the off Sundays in each community, presenting himself as devoted and present in both households, while actually splitting his time between them with a precision that must have required constant, careful management. His woodworking business, legitimate in every respect, provided the perfect cover, an endless stream of plausible reasons for travel, for overnight stays, for extended absences that no reasonable wife would think to question. Sarah, sitting beside her mother, added her own perspective quietly. Her voice, I noticed even through my own devastation, carrying an echo of Eli's own measured cadence. She told us that she had grown up believing her father to be a wonderful man, present for every important moment of her childhood that his travel schedule allowed, attentive and loving during the time he was home, a man the whole community respected. She described a father who taught her to read the Bible, who built her a hope chest with his own hands when she turned 16, who walked her down the aisle at her wedding 4 years ago. Every single detail she described was a detail I recognized, because it was also my Eli, the same tenderness, the same quiet devotion, simply divided. All these years, between 2 households that never knew of each other's existence. I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, how she had found out about me, about us, about this entire other life her father had kept hidden. And it was Sarah who answered, her eyes filling with tears even as she spoke. He told me, she said. 3 weeks before he passed, he knew he was dying, and he called me to his bedside when Mam had stepped out, and he told me everything. He made me promise that after he passed, once enough time had gone by, I would find you and tell you the truth. He said he couldn't die with this lie unconfessed. He said he owed it to both families to finally be honest. This detail struck me with a particular force, because it meant that in his final months, in those tender weeks when I sat beside him reading scripture and feeding him broth, believing we were sharing an intimate and complete goodbye, he was carrying this enormous secret, this decision already made, to have his other daughter deliver the truth I could no longer receive from his own lips, because he would be gone by the time it reached me. He had chosen, in the end, to confess, but he had chosen to do it in the cruelest possible way, at the moment when I would be most vulnerable, most raw with fresh grief, and through the voice of a stranger, rather than through his own. I want to tell you, because I think it matters, that Ruth herself had not known the full truth until roughly the same time as Sarah. Eli had confessed to both of them, separately in those final weeks, finally unburdening himself of a secret he had carried and constructed and maintained for 32 years. Ruth's grief, sitting there across from me in that cold barn, was in many ways a mirror of my own, though her particular wound was different. She had lost not only a husband, but the entire foundation of her identity as his wife, learning in the same breath that she had married a bigamist, that her own marriage, however loving it had felt to her for 3 decades, had never been legally or morally what she believed it to be. We sat together in that barn for nearly 2 hours. The 4 of us, no, all of us together, my children and Ruth and Sarah, slowly, painfully piecing together the full shape of what Eli had done. We compared dates and trips and absences, matching Ruth's memories against my own, and with each comparison, the sickening reality of it became clearer. There were entire years, entire stretches of our marriage, where I now understood he had simply been living 2 full lives, present for births and illnesses and holidays in both households, absent from each exactly when he needed to be present in the other. A double existence maintained with a level of organization and deception that, even now, in my anger, I cannot help but marvel at the sheer audacity of it. I do not know how to adequately describe the particular flavor of grief that settles over a person in a moment like that. It is not simply sadness. It is a kind of vertigo, a complete disorientation, because everything you believe to be solid ground reveals itself to have been an illusion all along. I grieved my husband, freshly, the loss still raw from just 3 days prior, and simultaneously, I grieved a second man I had never known existed. A man who apparently lived inside the same body as my husband, but who I had never once met. A stranger who had been sleeping beside me for 51 years. The funeral meal continued outside in the barn without us. The community sharing food and quiet fellowship, unaware, most of them, of the earthquake that had just occurred in the milking parlor. Eventually, my sister Naomi went out to explain, in the vaguest terms she could manage, that there had been a family matter requiring my attention, and slowly, respectfully, as is our way, the mourners began to depart, leaving casseroles and pies on every surface of my kitchen, leaving me alone with a truth too large to hold. Ruth and Sarah stayed in a hotel in the nearest town that night, at my son Samuel's suggestion, rather than making the 6-hour drive back in their state of exhaustion and grief. And the following morning, at my own request, though I still do not fully understand where I found the strength to make it, they returned to our farm, and we talked further, this time with slightly more composure, slightly more room for the kind of careful, painful questions that needed asking. I learned that Sarah had an older brother, Jonas, who had not made the trip, still too angry, too devastated by the revelation to face any part of it directly. I learned that Ruth's community, smaller and even more conservative than our own, had reacted to the news, once it inevitably became known there too, with a mixture of shock and quiet shame that mirrored what I would soon experience in my own district. I learned the precise dates, as best Ruth could reconstruct them, of when Eli had begun courting her, and doing that arithmetic against my own memory of those years was one of the most painful exercises of my life, because I remembered, with sudden and terrible clarity, a period when Eli had seemed distant, distracted, and I had attributed it, foolishly, innocently, to the stress of his growing business. I now understood that period as the exact time he was falling in love with and beginning to court another woman entirely. I asked Ruth, at one point, whether she had ever suspected, in 32 years, that something was wrong, and her answer has stayed with me every day since. She said that there had been moments, small strange moments, over the decades. A phone call she once overheard, the tail end of that didn't quite make sense. A receipt from a store in a town he claimed not to have visited. A letter he seemed anxious to intercept from the mailbox before she could see it. But each time, she said, she had pushed the suspicion away, told herself she was being foolish, told herself that a man so devoted, so present, so clearly loving toward her and their children could not possibly be hiding something so enormous. He was very good at being trustworthy, she said to me, her voice flat with an exhaustion that went beyond physical tiredness. That was the worst part. He never gave me a real reason to doubt him. He made sure of that. I found in the days and weeks that followed that conversation that this detail, more than almost any other, was the one I returned to again and again in my own private turning over of the whole terrible situation. He made sure of that. 51 years of marriage, and he had made absolutely sure, through careful planning and consistent, convincing behavior, that I would never have reason to doubt him. It meant that my trust in him had not been naive exactly, not foolish in the way I sometimes accused myself of being in my darkest moments. It meant that I had been deceived by a master of deception, a man who had dedicated enormous energy, for over 3 decades, to the maintenance of a lie so complete that neither of his wives, women who loved him and lived beside him and knew, we believed, the deepest corners of his heart, ever once glimpsed the truth. I want to tell you now about the weeks that followed, because I think the immediate shock of discovery, as devastating as it was in some ways only the beginning of a much longer reckoning. The news, as news does in a close community, spread within days. Our bishop came to visit, along with 2 of the ministers, sitting with me at my kitchen table with expressions of the deepest sorrow and concern, trying to help me understand from a spiritual perspective how to process what had happened. There was no precedent in living memory, in our particular district, for a situation quite like this one. Infidelity, sadly, is not entirely unheard of even in our communities, though it is rare and deeply shameful when it occurs. But bigamy, an entire secret second marriage maintained for over 3 decades, complete with children who had grown to adulthood without ever knowing of our existence, this was something none of our church leadership had ever encountered before. And they struggled, honestly and visibly, to know how to counsel me. The community's reaction was, as I had feared it would be, complicated. There were those, and I will not pretend otherwise, who seemed almost to blame me for it, in that quiet, indirect way that shame sometimes moves through a close-knit community, wondering aloud, though never quite to my face, what I might have done or failed to do that would drive a man to such extremes. This was, I want to be very clear, a minority reaction, and one that faded as the community came to better understand the calculated, deliberate nature of Eli's deception. But in those early weeks, when I was at my most fragile, even a handful of such whispered judgments felt like salt poured directly into an open wound. Far more common, and far more sustaining, was the outpouring of genuine support from the vast majority of my community. Women I had known my whole life came to sit with me, bringing food, bringing their quiet presence, understanding instinctively that there were no words adequate to the situation, and that simple companionship was the greatest gift they could offer. My sisters took turns staying with me those first weeks, not wanting me to be alone with my thoughts for too many hours at a stretch. My children devastated themselves by the revelation about their father, nonetheless rallied around me with a fierce protectiveness that, even in my darkest moments, gave me something solid to hold on to. I struggled, in those early weeks, with a question that I suspect anyone in a similar situation would struggle with. A question that had no satisfying answer, no matter how many times I turned it over. Which parts of my marriage had been real? If Eli could maintain an entire second family, an entire second set of loving memories and shared tenderness with Ruth and her children for 32 years without either of us knowing, then what did that mean about the love I had believed we shared? Had he loved me at all, truly? Or had I simply been one half of a carefully managed arrangement, useful to him in ways I could not fully comprehend? Had our children been, to him, simply one set of children among two, loved perhaps, but not loved in the singular, complete way I had always believed? I do not know that I have ever fully answered that question, even now, 5 years distant from the initial discovery. But I have come to a kind of understanding, hard-won and imperfect, that I want to share with you, because I think it may be useful to anyone who has ever had to reckon with a similar betrayal, whether the specifics match my own story or not. I have come to believe, based on everything I have learned in the years since, both from my own memories and from the conversations Ruth and I have continued to have, remarkably over these past years, that Eli did love both of us, in his own deeply flawed and selfish way. I do not say this to excuse him, and I want to be very clear about that, because what he did was a profound betrayal, a sustained deception that caused immense pain to 2 women and multiple children who deserved so much better from him. But I have found, in my own process of healing, that it serves me better to believe he was capable of real love, twisted and divided as his expression of it was, than to believe that 51 years of my life were built entirely on calculated manipulation with no genuine feeling behind it at all. Perhaps this is simply the story I have needed to tell myself in order to keep breathing. I am at peace with that possibility. A woman my age has earned the right to construct whatever narrative allows her to keep living with dignity. What I struggled with far more than the question of his love, and what took far longer to work through, was my own sense of foolishness, the nagging voice that insisted I should have known, should have suspected, should have caught some thread of the deception over 3 long decades. I spent many sleepless nights during that first year replaying every business trip, every late arrival home, every moment of distraction I had ever noticed in him, searching for the signs I felt certain, in my shame, that I must have simply ignored. It was, actually, a conversation with Ruth herself, of all people, that finally helped me release that particular burden. We had begun, cautiously, corresponding by letter in the months after the funeral, an arrangement that surprised everyone in both of our families, including ourselves. In one of those early letters, I confessed to her my persistent shame, my conviction that I must have been willfully blind not to notice what was happening for so many years. Her response, which I have kept and reread many times since, said something I will paraphrase for you now, though I will not quote her words directly. She reminded me that she had lived under the exact same deception, in a different household, with a different set of details, and that she too had spent months believing she must have been foolish or inattentive to miss it. But the truth, she wrote, was not that we had been foolish women. The truth was that we had been married to an extraordinarily skilled deceiver, a man who had, by Ruth's own careful reconstruction of events, spent literal decades refining and maintaining his double life with the kind of discipline and attention that most people reserve for a demanding career. We had not failed to see through an ordinary lie. We had failed to see through an extraordinary one, sustained by a man who had every incentive and considerable skill in keeping it hidden. That reframing, offered to me by the very woman whose existence had shattered my understanding of my own marriage, was one of the most healing gifts I received in that entire difficult season. It did not erase my pain. It did not answer every question I still carried. But it lifted, at least partially, the particular weight of self-blame that had been crushing me nearly as much as the original betrayal itself. I want to tell you now about meeting Eli's other children properly, because I think this part of the story surprised me more than almost any other aspect of this whole ordeal. In the weeks following the funeral, as the initial shock began to settle into something more like a chronic, low-grade ache, I found myself increasingly curious, almost against my own will, about this other family. These people who had shared so much of my husband's life without my knowledge. It would have been entirely understandable, I think, if I had wanted nothing further to do with any of them, if I had simply closed that door and tried to move forward in whatever peace I could construct on my own. Many people in my situation, I imagine, would have made exactly that choice, and I would not judge them for it. But something in me, perhaps stubbornness, perhaps a genuine need to understand the fullest possible truth of the life I had lived, pushed me instead toward more contact, not less. I asked Ruth, in one of our letters, whether she would be willing to meet again, properly this time, not in the chaos and shock of a funeral day, but in a calmer setting where we might actually talk as two women, trying to make sense of a shared, terrible situation. She agreed, and some 4 months after the funeral, I made the 6-hour trip myself, accompanied by my daughter Miriam, who was determined not to let me face this particular reckoning alone. We stayed 2 nights in a small guest house near Ruth's settlement, and over those 2 days, I met not only Ruth again, but her son Jonas, who had finally agreed to meet me, still visibly angry, still working through his own version of this betrayal, but willing, for his mother's sake, and perhaps his own curiosity, to sit across a table from the other family his father had kept hidden his entire life. I met Sarah's husband and her 2 young children, my husband's grandchildren, children who called Ellie Daddy just as my own grandchildren had, using our word for grandfather. Children who had loved him just as sincerely and just as completely as my own grandchildren had, and who were now grappling, in their own age-appropriate ways, with the confusing reality that their beloved grandfather had led a life far more complicated than the one they thought they knew. I will not pretend that these visits were easy or free of tension. There were moments of real anger in that first extended visit, particularly from Jonas, who at one point asked me directly, his voice tight with a resentment he had clearly been carrying for months, why I thought it was appropriate for me to insert myself into their family's grief when my own presence was, in his words, a reminder that our whole life was a lie. I did not have a good answer for him in that moment, and I told him so honestly. I told him I did not entirely know why I had come, except that I could not seem to stop myself from wanting to understand the fullest truth of the man I had spent 51 years loving, and that understanding him, I had come to believe, meant understanding all of the people he had loved, not only the ones who came before or after in some story I could control. Over the following months, and then years, something unexpected happened. Something I could never have predicted in those first devastating weeks after the funeral. Ruth and I became, in a strange, complicated, unlikely way, something like friends. Not in spite of our shared trauma, but somehow through it. We were, after all, perhaps the only 2 people on Earth who fully understood the particular shape of what had been done to us. both of us having believed ourselves to be the sole, complete wife of a devoted and loving man. Both of us having built entire lives, entire identities as wives and mothers on a foundation that turned out to be only half the story. We began writing more regularly, then eventually speaking by phone on the rare occasions either of our communities permitted such access. And then, over the following years, visiting each other's homes several times a year, our extended families slowly, cautiously, forming connections that none of us could have imagined at that graveside 4 years. No, 5 years ago now. My grandchildren have met their previously unknown cousins, Sarah's children. There have been shared holiday meals. Awkward at first, filled with careful conversation and long silences, but gradually, slowly, warming into something that resembles, strangely enough, an extended family, bound together by the very betrayal that once threatened to destroy us both. I do not want to paint this as a simple, tidy resolution, because it was not, and it is still not, even now. There remain difficult days. There remain moments when the old anger resurfaces, sharp and sudden, triggered by some small detail. A piece of Eli's furniture I encounter that I now know might have been built during a period he was away from Ruth's household, or a memory of a particular anniversary that I now must recalculate against a timeline I never knew existed. Jonas and I have never become close, though we have reached a respectful, careful peace with each other, understanding that we are both simply doing our best with an impossible situation. But Ruth, unexpectedly, has become one of the most important people in my life in this final season of my years. We are, in a way neither of us ever asked for, and neither of us would have chosen. Sisters in grief, sisters in betrayal, and somehow, remarkably, sisters in a strange and hard-won peace that we built together out of the wreckage Eli left behind. We have spent long afternoons on her porch and mine, comparing notes, filling in the gaps of each other's understanding of the man we both loved and both lost twice over, once to death, and once to the revelation of who he truly was. I have asked myself many times, in the years since, what I would say to Eli if I could speak to him one more time, if I could stand at that graveside again with the full knowledge I now carry, and demand of him the explanation he never gave any of us while he lived. I have imagined that conversation 1,000 different ways, in 1,000 different moods, sometimes furious, sometimes simply sorrowful, sometimes searching for some thread of understanding that might make sense of it all. What I keep returning to, in my most honest moments, is not a question of anger, but a question of waste. Such enormous energy, such careful, sustained deception, maintained over 3 decades, energy that could have been spent, I cannot help but think, simply being honest with both of us from the beginning, allowing each of us the dignity of choosing our own path, with full knowledge of the truth. Perhaps Ruth and I would have made different choices entirely, had we known. Perhaps we would have refused him both, and found other lives, other loves, other paths forward that did not require sharing a man neither of us knew we were sharing. Or perhaps, and this thought sits uncomfortably with me even now, perhaps some version of a shared arrangement, entered into honestly, might have caused less harm than the elaborate lie he chose instead. I do not know. I will never know. And I have had to make a fragile peace with that particular unknowing. What I do know, what I have come to understand in these 5 years of processing the most disorienting revelation of my entire long life, is that the love I felt for Eli during our 51 years together, however incomplete my understanding of him, ultimately proved to be, was real to me. My grief for him, both the grief I felt at his death and the different, more complicated grief I felt in learning the truth of his double life was and remains real. My children, the 5 who lived, and the 1 small daughter I lost too young, are real, undeniable proof of a life we built together. Whatever else that life also contained that I did not know about. I have chosen, in these later years of my own life, to hold both truths simultaneously, the genuine tenderness I experienced and the profound betrayal I ultimately uncovered, without insisting that one must cancel out the other. This has not been an easy practice to learn. There were long stretches, particularly in that first difficult year, when I wanted desperately to simplify the story, to decide once and for all that Eli was either the loving husband I remembered or the calculating deceiver Ruth's story revealed, to pick one narrative and discard the other so that I might finally rest. But life, I have learned in my 79 years, rarely allows for such clean simplicity, especially not when it comes to matters of the human heart, which is capable, it turns out, of far more complexity and contradiction than any of us like to admit. I want to speak now, if you'll allow an old woman a bit more of your time, about what this experience has taught me about trust itself, because I think it is perhaps the most universal lesson buried within this very particular, very unusual story. I was raised, as I told you at the beginning of this telling, to trust completely, to submit fully to the authority and honesty of my husband, to never question or doubt the man God had given me to walk through life beside. This was not a burden to me for most of my marriage. It felt, in truth, like a gift. A kind of freedom from the exhausting work of constant suspicion. A peaceful certainty that allowed me to focus my energy on raising our children and building our home, rather than on watching my husband's every move with a wary eye. I do not regret that trust, even now, even knowing what it ultimately concealed from me. I do not believe the answer to what happened to me is that women should live in perpetual suspicion of the people they love, scanning every interaction for hidden deception. That is not a life I would wish on anyone, and it is not a life, frankly, that I believe honors the genuine trust that exists in the vast majority of marriages, including, I still believe, in significant portions of my own. What I have come to understand instead is something more nuanced, something about the difference between trust and blindness, though I confess I still struggle, even now, to fully articulate where exactly that line should be drawn. Perhaps the lesson is simply this, that love, real as it may feel in the moment, does not automatically confer complete knowledge of another person's heart. That even 51 years of shared life, shared labor, shared grief and joy, does not guarantee that you have seen the whole of someone, that hidden rooms may exist in even the most familiar house. Rooms you never had reason to suspect, because the visible rooms were furnished with such convincing warmth and care. I do not know that this realization should change how any of us choose to love, but I think it has made me, in these final years of my own life, a bit more humble about the limits of what any of us can truly know of another human soul. However close we hold them, I want to tell you a little now about how I have rebuilt my own life in these 5 years since Eli's death and the revelation that followed it. Because I think it is important for you to know that grief, even grief as complicated and disorienting as mine, does not have to be the final word on a person's story. I still live on the same farm, in the same farmhouse where I raised my children, though my son David and his family have moved into the smaller house on the property, the one we call the Daddy House, built originally for Eli's own aging parents decades ago, and now serving the same purpose for me, a place where I can live independently while remaining close to family who check on me daily. I still quilt with the women of my church, still attend Sunday services every other week, still tend a smaller garden than I once managed. My aging hands not quite what they used to be, but still capable, God willing, of coaxing tomatoes and beans from the good dark soil that has sustained my family for generations. My grandchildren, all 31 of them now, spanning ages from toddlers to young adults, with children of their own on the way, fill my days with a particular kind of joy that I have found, somewhat to my own surprise, has not been diminished by the painful knowledge I now carry about their grandfather. If anything, I have found myself more present with them, more determined to build with them the kind of open, honest relationships I now understand were somehow, despite everything, missing from at least part of my own marriage. I speak with Ruth perhaps twice a month now, our friendship having settled into something comfortable and sustaining. Two old women who understand each other in a way perhaps no one else in either of our lives ever will. We have joked, in our darker moments of humor, that we are perhaps the only members of what we sometimes call, quietly and only to each other, our particular sisterhood. Women who discovered at the worst possible moment that the men they trusted completely were capable of a deception so total it defies easy explanation. I do not carry the anger I once carried, though I want to be honest and tell you that some version of it never fully disappears. I have simply learned to set it down more often than I pick it up, to let it visit without allowing it to move in permanently. I have found, through much prayer and much conversation with my bishop and my own family, a kind of forgiveness for Eli, though I want to be very careful about what I mean by that word, because I think it is often misunderstood. Forgiveness, for me, has not meant deciding that what he did was acceptable, or excusable, or somehow less harmful than it truly was. It has meant instead releasing myself from the burden of carrying that anger every single day, choosing instead to hold my memories of him, the true tenderness alongside the true betrayal, with a kind of tired, weathered grace that allows me to keep living my remaining years with something resembling peace. I think often about what I would want my own children and grandchildren to take from this story, should they ever hear it told in full. And I think what I would want them to understand most is this: that even a life built on a foundation you later discover to be partially false is not therefore a wasted life. The love I gave my children was real and complete, whatever complications existed in the marriage that produced them. The community I built, the faith I practiced, the countless small acts of daily devotion I poured into 51 years of marriage, none of that becomes meaningless simply because I later learned my husband was living a second life alongside our shared one. I choose to believe, and I have earned, I think at 79 years old, the right to choose the framework through which I understand my own life. That my story is one of resilience, not simply one of betrayal. That the woman who sat frozen on a graveyard's frozen earth 5 years ago, believing her entire world had ended, has grown, slowly and painfully, into a woman who found her way to a strange and unexpected peace, and even, remarkably, to a new and treasured friendship with the very woman whose existence once threatened to destroy her. If you are watching this tonight, and you are carrying your own version of a betrayal, whether it resembles mine in its particulars, or looks entirely different, whether it is fresh and raw or old and half-healed, I want you to know that healing, real healing, is possible, even when the wound feels too enormous to ever close. It will not look the way you expect it to look. It certainly did not look for me the way I would ever have predicted in those first devastating weeks. But it is possible. And I am living proof, an old Amish woman, sitting in her darty house at 79 years old, still finding reasons to laugh, still finding joy in her grandchildren, still finding, against every expectation, an unlikely friendship with the other wife of the same complicated man, still finding her way, day by day, towards something that finally feels, after all these years, like peace. Before I close this telling tonight, I want to thank you, truly from the bottom of my heart, for sitting with me through this whole long story. It has not been an easy one to tell, even now, even after so much time and so much healing. But I have found in sharing it a kind of purpose I did not expect. A sense that perhaps my pain, put to some use in helping another person feel less alone in their own difficult story, was not entirely wasted after all. If this story moved you, if any part of it resonated with your own life, or simply held your attention through to this final moment, I would be so grateful if you would take a moment to like this video and subscribe to this channel so that you do not miss the stories still to come. And please, before you go, leave a comment below and tell me where in the world you are watching this from tonight. I read every single comment, and it means more to this old woman than you could possibly know, to see how far these stories reach, how many different lives in different corners of the world find their way to sit with me for a while, listening to an old Amish widow tell the truth about the most difficult chapter of her long life. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And until the next time I have a story to share with you, I wish you peace, real peace, the hard-won kind. The kind that comes not from avoiding life's difficulties, but from walking all the way through them and finding somehow, on the other side, that you are still standing, still capable of love, still capable of joy, still capable even after everything, of a life worth living. Before I truly let you go tonight, I find there is more I want to say. More threads of this story I have not yet pulled all the way to their end. And I hope you will indulge an old woman who has waited a long time to have someone willing to listen to the whole of it. There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes with carrying a secret this large, even when that secret was not of your own making, and for years I did not have the words, or perhaps did not have the courage, to speak of it beyond the small circle of my own family and Ruth's. Telling it to you now, into this small device my granddaughter set up for me, feels like setting down a weight I have carried silently for far too long. Let me go back, if you will allow me, to those early days after the funeral, because I skipped past some details that I think matter. Details about the practical, unglamorous work of untangling a life that had been secretly split in two for over 3 decades. There is a temptation, when telling a story like this, to move quickly toward the parts that feel most dramatic. The graveside revelation, the tearful conversations in the milking parlor, the eventual unlikely friendship. But grief, real grief, does not move in such a tidy narrative line. It moves through paperwork and awkward phone calls, and the slow, grinding work of simply getting through each ordinary day while carrying an extraordinary wound. In the weeks after the funeral, I had to reckon with questions I never imagined a woman in my position would ever need to ask. Was my marriage to Eli even legally valid, given that Ruth's marriage to him had come first by 19 years? I consulted, with my son Samuel's help, an English lawyer in the nearest town. A kind man who had done work for several families in our community over the years, and who listened to my situation with a gentleness I will always remember, given how unusual and painful a story it must have been for him to hear. He explained to me, as gently as such news can be explained, that under the law, a person cannot legally marry more than one spouse at a time, which meant that in the eyes of the English government, my marriage to Eli, coming after his marriage to Ruth, may not have been considered legally valid at all, though the particulars would require deeper investigation, given that our marriage had never been formally registered with the state in the way English marriages typically are, our community historically preferring to keep such matters within the church rather than involving outside government records. This was, I want to tell you honestly, one of the more disorienting pieces of the whole ordeal, stranger somehow than even the initial revelation itself, because it meant that even the simple legal fact of my marriage, something I had never once had cause to question in 51 years, was suddenly uncertain. In practical terms, it mattered less than you might expect, given that our community's inheritance and property matters are typically handled through church council and family agreement rather than strict adherence to state law. And given that Eli's estate, modest as it was beyond the farm itself, was something my children and I worked out amicably among ourselves, without significant legal intervention. But emotionally, learning that my marriage might not have even been legally recognized, that in the eyes of the wider world I may have simply been, unknowingly, another man's mistress rather than his wife, was a blow I had not anticipated, and one that took me a long while to absorb. I want to tell you about a conversation I had with our bishop during this period, because it shaped how I came to understand my own situation within the framework of my faith, which has always been the bedrock beneath everything else in my life. I went to him, perhaps 6 weeks after the funeral, still raw, still uncertain how to hold my grief and my anger and my confusion all at once, and I asked him directly whether I had sinned, unknowingly, by remaining married to a man who was already married to another woman. It was a question that had been eating at me in the quiet hours of the night, a fear that somehow I bore some spiritual culpability for a deception I had no part in creating and no knowledge of during all those years it was occurring. He answered me with more compassion than I had perhaps expected, though I should not have doubted him, having known him my whole life as a fair and thoughtful shepherd of our small flock. He told me that sin requires knowledge and intention, that a woman deceived cannot be held responsible for the deception practiced against her. That in the eyes of God, I believe, and in the eyes of our church, I was the wronged party in this situation, not a participant in wrongdoing. He reminded me of the story of Jacob, from our own scriptures, who was himself deceived into marrying Leah before he was permitted to marry Rachel, the woman he had actually intended to wed, tricked by Laban in the darkness of the wedding night. It was, he said, an old story. This particular kind of deception, older than any of us, and while the specifics of my situation were unusual for our times, the fundamental wrong being done to a deceived spouse was as old as Scripture itself. I found some comfort in that conversation, though I will admit it did not erase every doubt I carried. There remained, for a long while, a persistent worry that our community might view me differently, might see me as somehow tainted by association with Eli's sin, even though I had committed no sin myself. I want to tell you, with gratitude, that this fear proved largely unfounded. My community, after the initial shock and the inevitable whispers that any small settlement produces when scandal touches one of its own, ultimately rallied around me with a compassion that restored some of my faith in the fundamental goodness of the people among whom I have lived my entire life. There is another aspect of this story I have not yet told you, and it concerns Eli's business, his woodworking shop, which had been such a source of pride for our family for decades. In the aftermath of the revelation, my son Samuel, who had taken over the daily operations of the shop some years before his father's death, found himself needing to reckon with an uncomfortable question. Had the shop itself, its profits, its resources, been used over the years to help fund Eli's double life? This was a difficult and delicate matter to investigate, made more complicated by the fact that we did not wish to drag Eli's name through further public scrutiny than the situation had already caused. But Samuel felt, and I agreed, that we needed to understand the truth as fully as we could, both for our own peace of mind and to ensure fairness toward Ruth's family, who Samuel felt, and I came to feel as well, deserved some accounting of how Eli's resources had been divided between our two households over the years. What Samuel discovered, going back through old business records and receipts as best he could reconstruct them, was that Eli had indeed used his woodworking income to support both households, in what appeared to be a roughly, though not precisely, even division over the years, funding both his life with me and our children, and his life with Ruth and her children from the same well of income, all while presenting to each household a version of his finances that made sense within the story he had constructed for each of us separately. This discovery led to some very difficult, very necessary conversations between our family and Ruth's family about fairness, about what, if anything, was owed to whom. Conversations that I am proud to say we navigated, eventually, with more grace and generosity than perhaps either family had any right to expect from the other, given the circumstances. We ultimately decided, as two families brought together by an impossible situation, that we would not pursue any formal legal division of Eli's remaining assets beyond what had already been informally established through decades of his own private arrangements. Instead, we chose a path of mutual generosity, my children voluntarily setting aside a portion of the farm's value to be shared with Ruth's children. An acknowledgement, I suppose, that fairness in this situation could never be perfectly calculated, only approximately honored through goodwill and a shared desire to move forward without further bitterness poisoning either family's future. I do not say this to suggest we found some magical, easy solution. There were hard conversations. There were moments of real tension, particularly as I mentioned with Jonas, who felt for a long time that no amount of shared generosity could compensate for the years of deception his mother and he and his sister had endured. But we found, in the end, a way forward that both families could live with. And I consider that no small accomplishment given how easily this entire situation could have devolved into lasting hostility instead. I want to speak now about my faith more directly, because I think it is impossible to tell this story honestly without acknowledging how central my relationship with God has been to my survival of this ordeal. There were nights in that first terrible year when I genuinely did not know how I would continue living with the knowledge I now carried. The betrayal felt, in its darkest moments, like more than I could bear, a weight heavy enough to crush whatever remaining strength I had left at 74 years old, which was my age when all of this occurred. I want to be honest with you and tell you that my faith did not simply erase this pain or make it disappear through some easy application of scripture and prayer. That is not how faith has ever worked in my own life, and I distrust anyone who tells you grief can be prayed away entirely. What my faith gave me instead was a framework for enduring, a community built around shared worship that showed up for me in tangible, practical ways, even when I had no words left to pray myself. Sisters in the church who prayed on my behalf during the weeks I could not find my own words. A bishop and ministers who counseled me with patience and wisdom, even when the situation fell so far outside their usual experience. My faith gave me the practice of forgiveness, not as a single decisive act, but as a daily discipline, something I had to choose again and again, sometimes multiple times within a single difficult day, releasing my anger toward Eli only to find it returning hours later, requiring me to release it once more, I have come to believe that this is simply what forgiveness looks like in real life. Not a single triumphant moment of release, but a long, repeated practice. Much like the daily labor of a farm, something you return to again and again, because the alternative, letting the fields go fallow, letting the anger take permanent root, would cost you far more in the end. I want to tell you a bit more about my children's individual responses to all of this, because each of them processed the revelation in their own distinct way, and I think there is something valuable in seeing the range of reactions even within a single family unit facing the same shocking news. My oldest daughter, Rebecca, ever the caretaker among my children, focused almost entirely on managing the practical aftermath, organizing meals, fielding phone calls, shielding me from unnecessary stress in those early weeks, her own grief seemingly pushed aside in favor of tending to mine, a pattern I eventually had to gently address with her, encouraging her to allow herself space to feel her own anger and confusion rather than only tending to mine. My son Samuel, as I mentioned, threw himself into the practical investigation of the business records, finding, I think, a sense of control and purpose in that detailed work that helped him process his own shock at learning the father he had apprenticed under, the father whose skilled hands had taught him his entire trade, had been living a double life all those years. He has told me, in quieter moments over the years since, that the hardest part for him was re-examining every piece of woodworking wisdom his father had ever taught him, wondering whether even that legacy, the one part of his father he had always felt closest to and proudest of, was somehow tainted by the larger deception underlying everything else. My daughter Anna, living in her more conservative community 2 states away, took the news the hardest of all my children, I think. Perhaps because the distance meant she processed much of it alone, without the daily support of family nearby that the rest of us had. She did not attend any of the subsequent meetings with Ruth's family for nearly 2 years, needing that much time before she felt ready to face the reality of her father's other life directly. When she finally did meet Sarah, some 2 years after the funeral, it was a tentative, careful meeting. But I am glad to say they have since built a cautious, respectful relationship, exchanging letters occasionally. Though Anna has told me she does not know that she will ever feel toward Sarah the same warmth I have come to feel toward Ruth. My son David, the quietest of my children even in ordinary times, processed his grief mostly through silence, through long hours working alone at his produce stand, and it took considerable patience and gentle prompting from his wife and siblings before he was willing to speak openly about how the revelation had affected him. When he finally did open up, perhaps 8 months after the funeral, he told me that his greatest fear was not about the past, but about the future. A worry that he himself might be capable of similar deception, that whatever flaw had allowed his father to live such a divided life might somehow live also within him. I want to tell you that I have watched David closely in the years since, and I see in him nothing but devoted, faithful partnership with his own wife, and I have told him so, repeatedly, hoping to ease a fear that I understand, given everything, but that I do not believe reflects any true inheritance from his father beyond simple genetics. My youngest, Miriam, who was with me for so much of this ordeal from the very first moment at the graveside, has perhaps become my closest companion in processing all of it, given how much of it she witnessed firsthand alongside me. She has traveled with me on nearly every visit to see Ruth's family over the years, and I think, in her own way, she has found in this experience a strange kind of purpose, becoming something of a bridge between our 2 families, helping to smooth over the inevitable awkwardness that arises when 2 families with such a complicated shared history attempt to build something new together. I want to tell you now about a specific visit to Ruth's community, perhaps 2 years after the funeral, that I think crystallizes for me the strange, unlikely grace that eventually grew out of this whole difficult situation. We had gathered, both families together, for what would have been Eli's 75th birthday, a date none of us had ever imagined we would mark together. And yet there we were, gathered at Ruth's own kitchen table, a table Eli himself had built, I later learned, much like the tables he had built for our own home, the same careful craftsmanship, the same small carved initial hidden beneath one of the drawers. We told stories that afternoon, stories about Eli, and I want you to understand how strange and how healing it was to finally hear the full range of them. Stories from Ruth's household that mirrored so closely certain memories from my own, and stories that differed entirely, revealing sides of him I had never glimpsed. Sarah told a story about her father teaching her to identify different types of wood by their grain and their smell, a lesson I recognized instantly, because he had taught our own son Samuel the exact same lesson, using as best we could determine from the details, almost the exact same words. There was something almost eerie in hearing that particular echo, evidence of a man who, whatever else was fractured and false about his life, brought a consistent, genuine version of himself into both households, in at least some respects. Jonas, even in his continued reserve toward me personally, told a story that day about a difficult winter when their community faced a poor harvest, and how Eli had quietly, without any fanfare or public acknowledgement, ensured several struggling families, including their own, had enough to get through until spring. A story that struck me deeply because it so closely resembled Eli's own quiet generosity within our community. The kind of unremarked kindness he showed toward struggling neighbors throughout all the years I knew him. It seems that whatever else was divided and duplicated in his double life, this fundamental generosity of spirit, however imperfectly it excuses the larger deception, was consistent in both places, a genuine thread running through both halves of his fractured existence. I left that visit, I remember, feeling something I had not expected to feel again regarding Eli, something almost like gratitude. Gratitude for the opportunity to understand him more fully, even through the painful lens of his betrayal. Gratitude for a fuller picture of a complicated man than either family alone could have provided. This does not mean I have made peace with what he did. I want to be very clear about that distinction, because I think it matters greatly. I have not decided that his deception was acceptable simply because I have come to understand him more fully. What I have found instead is a way to hold complexity without demanding simple resolution, to understand a person as capable of real goodness and real devastating wrongdoing simultaneously, without either fact canceling out the other. I think, if I am honest with myself, that this capacity to hold complexity is perhaps the greatest gift my advanced age has given me in processing this ordeal. A younger version of myself, I suspect, would have needed the story to resolve more cleanly, would have needed to decide definitively that Eli was either a monster or a misunderstood man, unable to comfortably inhabit the uncertain space between those two poles. But 79 years of living, 79 years of watching how rarely life actually resolves into such clean categories, has given me, I think, a certain patience for ambiguity that has served me well in this particular trial, difficult as it has been. I want to close, finally, truly this time, with a reflection on what I hope for the remaining years I have left, however many God chooses to grant me. I hope to continue building this strange, unlikely bridge between my family and Ruth's, To continue watching my grandchildren build relationships with cousins they never knew existed until this whole ordeal brought our families together. I hope to continue finding, in my friendship with Ruth, a companionship that neither of us expected, but that both of us have come to treasure. Two old women who found, in each other, an understanding that perhaps no one else on this earth could offer either of us. I hope, too, that in telling this story to you tonight, whoever and wherever you are, I have offered some small measure of comfort, some evidence that even the most disorienting betrayal, even a truth as strange and destabilizing as the one I discovered at my husband's graveside 5 years ago, does not have to be the final chapter of a person's story. There is life after such a discovery. There is even remarkably unlikely joy to be found on the other side of it, if you are patient enough and faithful enough, and perhaps stubborn enough, as I have certainly been accused of being by my own children more than once over the years, to keep walking forward through the difficulty, rather than allowing it to root you permanently in place. Thank you again, truly, for spending this time with me tonight. If any part of my story touched you, I would be so grateful if you would like this video and subscribe to the channel so that these stories can keep finding their way to the people who need them. And please, before you close this video, leave me a comment and let me know where you are watching from. It is a small thing, I know, but it means the world to this old woman to imagine all the different corners of the earth where my story has traveled tonight. Until we meet again in the next story, I wish you peace, and I wish you the courage to keep walking forward, whatever difficult truth you may be carrying tonight. There is one more part of this story I have hesitated to tell, and I have gone back and forth many times over these past weeks about whether to include it here tonight, but I think, in the end, honesty has served me well throughout this telling, and I do not want to stop short of it now. I want to tell you about the year I nearly lost my faith entirely, because I think it would be dishonest of me to suggest that my journey through this ordeal was one of steady, uninterrupted growth toward peace. There was a season, roughly a year and a half after the funeral, when the weight of everything finally caught up with me in a way I had not anticipated. A delayed reckoning that arrived only after the initial shock had worn off, and the slower, quieter grief had time to settle fully into my bones. It began, I think, with a simple realization that struck me on an ordinary Tuesday morning while I was hanging laundry on the line behind my house. A task I had performed thousands of times over the decades, without much thought. I realized, standing there with a wet sheet in my hands, that I would never again be able to trust my own memory of my marriage without a shadow of doubt attached to it. Every fond recollection I turned to for comfort, every memory of Eli's tenderness or devotion, now carried with it an asterisk, a small voice asking whether that particular moment had been genuine or whether it had been, in some way I could not always identify, part of the careful management of two households that required his constant vigilance. This realization hit me with a force I had not expected, months after I believed I had already absorbed the worst of the shock, and it plunged me into a depression deeper than anything I had experienced even in those first raw weeks. I stopped attending church regularly during this period, which was, for a woman of my faith and my age, a significant departure from everything I had known my whole life. I could not, for a time, sit through a sermon about faithfulness or marriage without feeling a fresh wave of bitterness rise in my throat. I found myself, during this dark season, questioning not only my marriage, but the whole framework of trust and submission I had been raised to practice, wondering whether the very teachings that had shaped my entire life had somehow left me more vulnerable to this kind of prolonged deception, rather than protecting me from it, as I had always believed they would. My children worried greatly during this time. Miriam in particular took to visiting me daily, sometimes simply sitting with me in silence when I had no words to offer. Other times gently encouraging me to eat, to rest, to allow myself the grace of simply surviving each day, without demanding of myself any greater accomplishment than that. My bishop visited often as well, and I want to give him great credit for the patience he showed me during this period, never once pressuring me to return to church before I was ready. Never once suggesting that my doubt or my anger reflected poorly on my faith, but instead simply continuing to show up, week after week, offering quiet companionship and prayer, without demanding any particular response from me in return. It was during this darkest season that Ruth, of all people, became an unexpected lifeline. We had been corresponding by that point for perhaps a year, our friendship still young and somewhat tentative, but when I finally confessed to her, in a letter I nearly did not send, the depth of the darkness I had fallen into, she responded not with easy reassurance, but with the honest admission that she had walked through a remarkably similar season herself, roughly a year after her own discovery of the truth. She wrote to me that she too had stopped attending her own church for several months, had questioned everything she believed about faith and trust and the whole shape of her life, and that what eventually pulled her through was not any sudden restoration of certainty, but simply the slow, patient accumulation of small good days strung together until they eventually outnumbered the bad ones. I found enormous comfort in that honesty, more comfort, in truth, than I had found in some of the well-meaning, but perhaps too easy reassurances offered by others in my life during that period. There is something particularly powerful about hearing from someone who has walked the exact same impossible road. Someone who does not need the situation explained to them because they have lived its twin themselves. Ruth's honesty about her own dark season gave me permission to be honest about mine, and gradually, slowly, over the following months, I did begin to find my way back, not to the exact faith I had held before, which I do not think any of us can ever fully recover once shattered, but to a new faith, older and more weathered, perhaps less naive but no less real for having been tested so severely. I returned to church gradually, first attending only occasionally, sitting in the back rows where I felt less exposed, and slowly, over the following months, returning to my regular place among the women of my district. I want to tell you that my relationship with God today is different than it was before all of this happened. Not weaker, I do not believe, but different, marked by a deeper acquaintance with doubt and struggle than I ever possessed in my younger years. When faith came more easily and certainty felt more natural, I think, if I am honest, this new relationship, hard-won as it was, has more depth and more resilience than the simpler faith I carried before, precisely because it has been tested by fire and found, eventually, to hold. I want to speak also, before I close this telling for good, about the particular challenge of grief anniversaries, because I think this is a detail that surprised me in its intensity, and that I have not heard many people discuss openly, even those who have experienced ordinary grief without the additional complication I carried. Each March, as the anniversary of Eli's death approaches, I find myself bracing for a particular kind of difficulty, a compounding of griefs that arrives all at once. The grief of losing my husband, fresh again each year in its own way, and the parallel grief of remembering, again, the revelation that came at his funeral. The two griefs arriving together each spring like an unwelcome pair of visitors who cannot be separated from one another. The first anniversary was, unsurprisingly, the most difficult, arriving during that dark season I described a moment ago, compounding my depression with the particular sharpness that anniversary grief always carries. My children gathered around me that day, understanding without needing to be told how difficult it would be. And we spent the day quietly, visiting Eli's grave together, saying little, simply being present with one another in our shared complicated mourning. By the second anniversary, something had shifted slightly, enough that I found myself able to invite Ruth and Sarah to join us at the graveside that year, a gesture that surprised even me when I first proposed it to my children, though they, having watched the friendship growing between Ruth and myself over the preceding months, were perhaps less surprised than I expected them to be. That second anniversary, with both families gathered at Eli's grave together, women and children from two households he had kept carefully separated in life now standing together in shared grief and shared complicated love, remains one of the most meaningful days of my entire life, difficult and beautiful in equal measure. A testament, I think, to how far all of us had traveled in that relatively short span of time. We have gathered together at his grave every March since, now 5 times, a tradition none of us anticipated, but that all of us have come to treasure. An annual reminder that even from the wreckage of such profound betrayal, something resembling family, something resembling healing, can still be built, patiently, deliberately, season after season. I want to offer, before I truly close tonight, a few reflections that I hope might be useful to anyone watching this who finds themselves in the midst of their own season of betrayal or grief, whatever specific shape that difficulty takes in your own life. I do not offer these as expert advice, understand, only as the hard-won observations of one old woman who has walked a particularly strange and difficult road and lived to tell of it. First, I would say this: allow yourself the full measure of your grief, without rushing toward resolution before you are ready for it. I made the mistake, in those early weeks, of believing I needed to arrive quickly at some settled understanding of what had happened, some tidy narrative that would allow me to move forward without further disruption. It was only when I gave up that expectation, when I allowed myself to sit in genuine confusion and anger and grief for as long as those feelings needed to be sat with, that real healing eventually became possible. Second, I would say, be wary of the particular shame that comes from believing you should have known, should have seen through a deception that was, in truth, carefully and skillfully constructed specifically to avoid detection. This shame will visit you, I suspect, regardless of the specific betrayal you may be facing. And I want you to know, as clearly as I can say it, that being deceived by someone skilled in deception is not evidence of your own foolishness. It is evidence only of the deceiver's skill and your own entirely reasonable capacity to trust the people you love. Third, and perhaps most importantly, I would say, do not let anyone, including your own harshest inner voice, tell you that you must choose a single simple story about the person who hurt you. I resisted, for a long while, the temptation to decide definitively whether Eli was a good man who made a terrible mistake or a fundamentally deceptive person who never truly loved either of his families as completely as he claimed. I have found more peace in refusing that false choice, in allowing him to remain, in my memory, a complicated, contradictory person capable of both genuine tenderness and devastating betrayal, than I ever would have found by forcing his memory into either extreme. Finally, I would say this, and I say it with the full weight of my 79 years behind it. Healing is possible, even from wounds you believe, in your darkest moments. To be beyond healing, I did not believe, sitting on that frozen ground beside Eli's fresh grave 5 years ago, that I would ever feel anything resembling peace again. I certainly did not believe I would come to consider the other wife, the woman whose existence shattered my understanding of my entire marriage. One of the dearest friends of my remaining years. And yet here I am, telling you this story with a steadiness I could not have imagined possessing in those first terrible weeks. Proof, I hope, that whatever difficulty you may be carrying tonight, however impossible healing may feel from where you currently stand, it remains possible. Patiently, imperfectly, but genuinely possible. I am grateful, more than I can properly express, for the chance to share this story with you tonight. For the strange gift of technology that allows an old Amish woman like myself, raised in a world of horses and lanterns and quiet fields, to somehow reach across the distance and share her story with people scattered across the entire world. People whose lives and circumstances I will likely never fully know or understand, but who have chosen, tonight, to sit with me through this long and difficult telling. If you have made it this far with me, I thank you with my whole heart. Please, if this story offered you anything of value, whether comfort or perspective or simply a few hours of engaged listening, take a moment now to like this video and subscribe to the channel, so that you might join me again when I have another story to share. And please, before you go, leave me a comment telling me where in this wide world you are watching from tonight. I read them all, every single one, and they remind this old woman, more than you could possibly know, that even in the quiet solitude of my later years, I remain connected to a world far larger and far more varied than the small farming community where I have spent the whole of my long life. Until next time, I wish you courage for whatever difficult truth you may be facing, patience for whatever healing you may still be waiting on, and peace, real and hard-won, for the remainder of your own journey. There is one small final memory I want to leave you with tonight, because I think it captures something of where I have finally arrived after these 5 long years, better than any summary or reflection I could offer. Last autumn, Ruth and Sarah's 2 children, came to stay with us for the harvest, a full week together on the farm. The longest visit our 2 families have shared since all of this began. We spent our days canning vegetables together in my kitchen, the way I once canned only with my own sisters and daughters. And I found myself teaching Sarah's youngest, a bright-eyed girl of 9, who reminds me so much of my own Miriam at that age, how to properly seal a jar of green beans so it would keep through the winter months ahead. On the last evening of their visit, we all gathered on my porch as the sun went down over the fields. The same fields Eli once walked as a young man courting me all those decades ago. And Ruth reached over and took my hand, an unplanned, simple gesture. And we sat there together, 2 old widows bound by the strangest possible circumstance, watching our grandchildren, his grandchildren, chase fireflies in the deepening dusk. Neither of us spoke for a long while. We did not need to. There was nothing left to explain between us that had not already been said 100 times over these past years, and there was, in that particular silence, a kind of completeness I never expected to find on the other side of such devastating betrayal. I thought, sitting there, of the frightened young girl I once was, waiting nervously for a boy to walk toward her across a hayfield so many decades ago, and I thought of the broken old woman I became for a time, sitting frozen on frozen ground beside a fresh grave, certain her whole world had ended. And I thought, finally, of the woman I am now, 79 years old, weathered by more than most people ever have to carry, and yet somehow, impossibly, still capable of sitting on a porch at sunset, holding the hand of a woman who once represented my greatest devastation, now representing instead one of the truest friendships remaining in my life. I do not know what final years God has planned for me, how many more harvests I will see, how many more of these firefly evenings I will be given. But I know that whatever time remains to me, I intend to spend it the way I spent that particular evening, in gratitude, in connection, in the hard-won, unlikely peace that grew, against every possible expectation, out of the very ground that once seemed only capable of holding my deepest grief. Thank you, truly and completely, for walking this whole long road with me tonight. Your presence, wherever you are watching from, however you came to find this story, has meant more to this old woman than these simple words can properly convey. If any part of what I have shared tonight touched your heart or offered you some measure of comfort or perspective, please take just a moment to like this video and subscribe to this channel so we might sit together again soon over another story from this long life of mine. And do not forget, before you close this video tonight, to leave a comment and tell me where in this vast world you are watching from. It is such a small thing to ask, and yet it means the world to me. This quiet reminder that my story, born in the stillness of a small Amish farm, has found its way into so many different lives, so many different corners of this earth. Until we meet again, I wish you the courage to face your own difficult truths, the patience to allow your own healing the time it needs, and the peace, hard-won and genuine, that I have finally found my own way toward after these long 5 years. God bless you all, and I will see you next time.